Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 237, Margaret Greenwood. Margaret Greenwood was born Margaret Shanahan in Ireland in 1816. She was the daughter of James and Anne Shanahan and was the second youngest of 7 children. She was convicted of house burglary in Kings County at the age of 17 in July 1832. She'd had prior convictions where she'd served 3 months jail. Her trial record listed that she was single, from Kings County, and was a housemaid. She was sentenced to 7 years transportation. Her description was her height 5 foot 1 inch, grey eyes, brown hair, and a sallow and freckled complexion. She departed on the 15th of April 1833 on the ship Caroline and arrived in New South Wales on the 6th of August 1833. On the 22nd of June 1834, she was recorded as a servant in the 3rd class, which meant that she'd had crosses next to her name and was at the lower class of the female convicts and was in the female factory. At this point, she had an offence where she was committed to the factory for 28 days. On the 15th of August 1834, she was still in 3rd class and in the factory. There was a record of a Martha Shanahan being buried at the age of 4 months in January 1835 at St John's, Parramatta, and it listed that she was born to a convict, Margaret Shanahan, in the female factory. On the 19th of August 1834, Margaret had gone to the district of Goulburn where she was placed, and there was a note to say that she was allowed to remain there. In 1836, she had a daughter, Margaret Greenwood, at Molongo, New South Wales, and the father of this child was William Greenwood. Margaret was born 4 years prior to their marriage, and they went on to have 10 more children. On the 2nd of October 1837, Margaret received her ticket of leave. William and Margaret were then married on the 18th of February 1840 at Bungendore, New South Wales, when Margaret was 24. William Greenwood was 4 years older than Margaret. He was born in Pennant Hills, New South Wales, in April 1912 to James Greenwood and Anne Gardner. James Greenwood had arrived on the vessel Friendship in 1811 as a free immigrant with his wife and 2 sons. Getting back to William, he held a publican's licence at Aurelian in New South Wales in April 1860. One pub he owned was called the Currency Lad. There was a reminiscence about the area, and it said, about 12 months after the first rush at Major's Creek, the late Billy Greenwood came out from Harold's Cross and opened the second pub on the field close to the falls where the first rush took place. I need scarcely say he did a good business and remained in the hotel for some years, when he removed to Crown Flat, which is now called Aurelian, and started a hotel on the hill where he was so well known in later years in the valley. William died in June 1867 of a fatal accident. Mr. William Greenwood of Aurelian met with an accident that proved fatal on Tuesday, on which evening shortly after dark he was returning home from his work driving a horse and cart when it came in contact with a stump. He was sitting on the cart and his leg came in violent contact with the stump, being pulled over it and very much crushed. He was taken home only a very short distance from the scene of the accident, and Dr. Alley was called in, bound up the leg and recommended his removal to hospital, where he was taken the following day. Dr. Patterson did all he could for the poor sufferer, but with very little hope of recovery, the injured leg, when the bandages were taken off, presented a shocking sight, the torn flesh hanging dissevered from the bone, all mortified. The unfortunate sufferer died on Sunday. His body was removed from the hospital by his family and taken to Mr. Cahill's Farrier's Farms, where it was conveyed to St. Bede's Cemetery yesterday afternoon, accompanied by a number of the deceased friends from Aurelian and other portions of the district. Mr. Greenwood is a very old resident in this part of the country, where he is greatly respected. He leaves a large family to deplore his loss, but fortunately they're nearly all grown up and married. So William was a sawyer at the time of his death. His death occurred at Braidwood and he was 56. It lists that his father was a farmer and his brother gave the information on his death certificate. It stated that he was born in Pennant Hills, New South Wales, and he'd been married to Margaret Shanahan for 24 years. It also stated at the time of his death there was 1 male alive, 7 girls alive and 3 children deceased. Within 5 months of her husband's death, things started going downhill for Margaret, and it seems that she'd been abandoned by her 8 surviving adult children. It also is telling that his brother was the informant on the death certificate, so it's quite likely that Margaret's downhill actually occurred earlier than the death of her husband. The first thing we see of her is on the 18th of December 1867 in the Gazette in Sydney. Margaret Greenwood, charged with attempting to set fire to a dwelling, the property of John Lynch of Aurelian, has been arrested by Constables O'Connell and Williams of the Aurelian Police. She's committed for trial at the next Quarter Sessions in Braidwood. On the 20th of March 1868 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Margaret Greenwood on bail was indicted that she did on the 30th of November at Aurelian feloniously and maliciously set fire to rag on paper with intent to burn an outhouse of John Lynch. The verdict was guilty and she was sentenced to 3 months in Braidwood jail. Within a month of being released from jail, in the New South Wales Government Gazette, Margaret Greenwood, charged with burglariously entering the premises of Henry Rutter, publican, Aurelian, on the 7th of July and stealing spirits and other property that has been recovered. She's been arrested by Sergeant Brennan and Constable Shanahan of Aurelian Police and committed for the next Quarter Sessions to be held at Braidwood. And then on the 15th of August 1868 in the Goulburn Herald and Chronicle, Margaret Greenwood charged with stealing wearing apparel, but this was acquitted. On the 9th of December 1870 in the Sydney Morning Herald, impatient of restraint. The woman Margaret Greenwood, who escaped from Braidwood jail a fortnight since, was recaptured and is reported by the Dispatch to having regained her freedom on Saturday. She was not long before she was missed, and on the search being made for her was found a little way in the bush by the side of the Goulburn Road. This woman appears to be perfectly adept at getting out of prison, as in addition to her former escape from the jail, she managed a short time ago to get out of the Aurelian lockup. The present form of her imprisonment was for only 2 months, 3 weeks of which had expired, so that she must have set a great price upon her liberty to be so indefatigable in regaining in when she had such a short time to serve. On the 17th of December 1870, it also adds, a woman named Margaret Greenwood was apprehended a few days ago near the road between Braidwood and Goulburn. She'd escaped on 2 occasions from Braidwood jail and also got out of the Aurelian lockup. So on the 1st of April 1871, in the Goulburn Herald and Chronicle, Margaret Greenwood was indicted for unlawfully escaping from Braidwood jail on the 4th of December. The prisoner pled guilty to running away from the jail, but added that there was no wall to stop her and she thought that there was no harm to go away. His Honour made inquiries of the police and learnt that she was an incorrigible offender, having since August 1867 been brought before the bench on 13 different occasions, during which period she'd been convicted 8 times. She was sentenced to 12 months in Braidwood jail. And then on the 15th of May 1872, in the Sydney Police Gazette, Margaret Greenwood, charged with maliciously setting fire to a haystack, the property of Thomas Roberts at Jembercombe, has been arrested, by whom not stated, and committed for trial at Braidwood Quarter Sessions. This offender is also charged with larceny. On the 15th of May 1872 in the Goulburn Herald and Chronicle, arson. An inquiry was held on Friday at the residence of T.J. Roberts Esquire, Exeter Farm near Braidwood, touching the destruction by fire of a haystack, the property of that gentleman. The evidence tended to show that a stack of hay containing about 12 tonne was on the night of the 20th of April destroyed by fire. The fire commenced on the outside of the stack, on the side nearest to the open bush. The stack had not been cut into. There was a barn full of grain near it. No one had gone near the barn that evening. With the assistance of George King, an old servant on the estate, and several others, some part of the stack was saved. King stated that there was no doubt that it had been set on fire. The fire appeared to have originated within 18 inches of the thatch. Mr. Roberts produced a stick with the remains of charred hay in it, which was found by one of the men. There were no trees in or near the stackyard from which such a stick could fall. Mr. James O'Brien gave evidence to the effect that he saw Margaret Greenwood on the evening going towards Major's Creek. She was going in the direction of the stack that was burnt. Matthew Trussell saw the woman, Greenwood, on the Sunday morning near Mr. Hassell's place when she said she lost her way and had to stop there for the night. Martha Retherwall, at present a confining in Braidwood Jail, but who's been taken out to give evidence at this inquiry, stated that while in jail, Margaret Greenwood, who was also serving a sentence, had said to her that she had a farm that she would have to see Hassel and Roberts about, that she had a down on Tom Roberts, she called him a wretch and used other bad expressions towards him. She was discharged from jail 6 weeks ago and brought back a fortnight ago. She had some conversation with a woman named Bridget Graham, who was also in jail at the time, and this woman, being sworn, stated that Margaret Greenwood called Mr. Roberts a wretch and that when she got out of jail she would go and burn him down. She said this 2 or 3 times, and that if she could get over the jail wall she would go and do it at once, only that she had government clothes on. Margaret Greenwood, being sworn, admitted having slept that night by a haystack near Mr. Hassel's, but that she was not near Mr. Roberts's that night. She denied ever uttering any threats against him and said that if she could do him a good turn, she would go there from Sydney to do it. If anyone had sworn that she stated that would have burnt down Mr. Roberts' house, it was false. The coroner having summed up very carefully, the jury returned a verdict that the said stack was maliciously set on fire on the night of the 20th of April by Margaret Greenwood, whereupon the coroner issued his warrant for the committal of Margaret Greenwood to take her trial at the next General Sessions in Braidwood on the 24th of July. Meanwhile, on the 22nd of May 1872 in the Government Gazette, Margaret Greenwood, under committal for trial for arson, was arrested by Constable Matthews of Majors Creek Police for stealing a shawl, the property of Mr. Dark of Braidwood, and sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment. And then on the 7th of August 1872, in the Monaro Mercury and Cooma and Bombala Advertiser, Margaret Greenwood, who'd been convicted of maliciously setting fire to a stack of hay, was given 2 years' imprisonment in Darlinghurst Jail. The jury returned a verdict of guilty with a strong recommendation to mercy on account of the prisoner's age of 54 years. His Honour, in passing sentence, said that in 1867 she'd been sentenced to 3 months for attempting to set fire to a house at Aurelian, and that she was now undergoing a sentence of 6 months for larceny, and the police report was that she'd undergone sentences for drunkenness, vagrancy and other offences. The 2-year imprisonment in Darlinghurst Jail was to take effect at the expiration of the term that she's now serving for larceny. Margaret was released from Darlinghurst in November 1874. However, only 4 months later she features in the Government Gazette again. On the 10th of March 1875, stolen between the hours of 11 p.m. on the 4th and 5 a.m. on the 5th from the residence of Cormac Smith, a wheelwright and blacksmith in Gibbs Street, a black velvet jacket, a silk jacket, 2 black dresses, a black cape trimmed with crepe and a jacket to match, a black silk dress, a brown silk umbrella, a satin skirt, 2 pairs of men's elastic side boots, 1 pair Russian leather, valued at about £11. Identifiable. Suspicion attaches to Margaret Greenwood, a discharged servant. She is about 50 years of age, with a stout build, dark complexion, hair turning grey, coarse, rough appearance, dressed in a puce dress with flowers, a black lace cap, and a hat trimmed with brown ribbon, came from Goulburn. And a week later in the Sydney Morning Herald, Margaret Greenwood was on the 9th apprehended by Constable Shanahan on a charge of stealing from a dwelling. Bridget Smith, the wife of Cormac Smith of Gibbs Street, deposed that the prisoner was a fortnight in her employ as a general servant and left of her own accord on the 26th of February. She said the work was too heavy for her. On the 4th of March, the house was entered into by a front window downstairs, and from the children's bedroom a variety of wearing apparel was stolen. Some time after the robbery, the prisoner was seen in Pitt Street by Mrs. Smith, and for some minutes Margaret Greenwood watched her and then ran away. Sarah English deposed that on the morning of the 9th the prisoner invited her to drink, having, as she said, pawned a silk shirt and other articles, and having 3p left. She had 2 papers like pawn tickets in her hand. A pair of boots was produced which were found in the street near the prosecutor's residence in the morning after the robbery, which resembled the boots the prisoner wore while in his service. Constable Shanahan deposed that after the prisoner's remand on Wednesday, as he conducted her to the lockup, she said to him, "I took the things, you may go and find them." Honora Cox of Wexford Street publican deposed that one morning in the week before last, the prisoner told her that she'd left Mrs. Smith's service and asked to be allowed to leave a bundle. The witness would not allow it. Mrs. Smith was recalled and deposed that after the prisoner left, but before the house was entered and robbed, she missed some house linen. Constable Williams deposed that between 1 and 2 a.m. on the 27th or 28th of February, he found Sergeant Foley and the prisoner together in Elizabeth Street. Foley was examining a bundle, the prisoner claimed, and it contained 2 sheets, a calico window blind and other things. The prisoner said she'd come down from Goulburn and knew no one in Sydney. This closed the inquiry and the prisoner was committed for trial. And then on the 10th of April, she stood trial for the theft from Cormac Smith's home. In the Sydney Mail and New South Wales Advertiser, it stated that the prisoner pled not guilty and was undefended. Greenwood had been in the prosecutor's employ, and after leaving, Mrs. Smith missed a number of things from the home. The verdict was guilty on the first count, and there was a very extensive record against the prisoner for arson, attempted arson, being illegally on a premises, being in possession of stolen property, escaping from prison, obscene language and drunkenness. In the present case, the prisoner was sentenced to 2 years hard labour at Darlinghurst Jail. So Margaret was released on the 4th of April 1877 from Darlinghurst Jail. Only a fortnight later in the Sydney Evening News, Margaret Greenwood, 50, being found in the dwelling house of Margaret Marshall in Castlereagh Street with intent to commit a felony, was sent to jail for 1 month. Prisoner stated that while drunk she'd wandered into the house. Prisoner had once been in Mrs. Marshall's service 2 years ago and had been once convicted of larceny. On the 20th of May 1887, in the Armidale Express and New England General Advertiser, tram accident. A woman was knocked down by a tram between Market and King Streets last night and died from the injuries received early this morning. She's been identified as Margaret Greenwood, an unfortunate well known to police. The accident is ascribed to want of care on the part of the deceased in crossing the track. A coroner's inquest was held on the 21st of May 1887 and was described in the Sydney Morning Herald. Fatally injured by a tram. The city coroner held an inquest yesterday at the Assembly Hotel in Hunter Street, touching the death of a woman named Margaret Greenwood, who on Wednesday night was fatally injured by a tram in Elizabeth Street between King and Market Streets. Kate Lynch, warder at Darlinghurst Jail, identified the body of the deceased and stated that she was 72 years of age and a widow. At 6 a.m. on Wednesday last, the deceased was discharged from jail where she had been completing a sentence for stealing. Dr Clay, resident medical officer at Sydney Hospital, deposed that he admitted the deceased in the institution at 11:30 p.m. She was unconscious and exhibited symptoms of concussion of the brain and a severe shock to the system. She gradually sank and died at 2 a.m. on the following day. A post-mortem examination on the body revealed a severe injury to the head, and many of the organs of the body were not in a healthy state. Death was due to concussion of the brain and shock to the system, consequent upon external violence. There was a slight odour of alcohol about the deceased on her admission to hospital. Michael Christian, residing at Mattison's Hotel, gave evidence that at 11:15 p.m. on Wednesday he was standing in Elizabeth Street near Market Street waiting for a tram. He noticed the deceased standing on the footway near the public school. He saw the woman fall back into the road. He picked her up and stood her against a lamppost. In doing this, he was assisted by a Transit Commissioner's inspector. The woman was hopelessly drunk at the time. She then walked away in the direction of King Street, assisted by a cripple. He saw a Crown Street pram proceeding from Market Street to King Street and immediately afterwards heard shouting. On looking round, he saw the woman who he had assisted lying on the tramway. Before the tram was stopped, the cowcatcher attached to the motor carried her 2 or 3 feet forward. The driver and the constable removed the body from the line. It was a very dark, but the headlight on the tram was shining brightly. The jury, without a moment's hesitation, returned a verdict that the woman died from the effects of injuries accidentally received. So for Margaret, a tragic life in the end, where it seems that her alcoholism had estranged her from her family. Margaret and William Greenwood's children. The firstborn, Mary Ann, married Patrick Doyle, known as Paddy, who was a child of Irish convicts, on the 2nd of October 1854 at Urelian. They had 11 children, and Mary died on the 26th of August 1911 in Redfern at the age of 75. Patrick died 9 months later, and the Maria Times and South Coast Journal outlined his death. Patrick Doyle, an old resident of Tilba, died recently at the Bega Hospital. He was well known throughout the district for his originality of character and his strong political opinions. He'd been for many years an unsuccessful miner in the dromedary. The second born was Anne, who was born in 1841 at Molongo, New South Wales. She married Henry Taylor Crosley at St Bede's Church on the 20th of June, and he was a butcher of Crown Flat at Urelian, and Anne, listed as the second daughter of William and Margaret Greenwood of the Currency Lad, Urelian, in this district. So that's referring to the pub that he owned. Anne and Henry had 6 children together, and she died on the 16th of July 1895 in Surrey Hills, New South Wales, aged 54. The third child was Margaret, who was born on the 10th of February 1842 at Reedsdale, New South Wales. She married Thomas Keefe in 1868 in Braidwood when she was 26 and Thomas 33. They had 7 children, and she died on the 3rd of July 1889 at Majors Creek, aged only 47 when her youngest child was only 8. Thomas died only a year later. The fourth child was Ellen, who was born on the 11th of August 1843 in Reedsdale, New South Wales. She married Michael Madigan at Braidwood in 1865. They had 6 children, and she died on the 20th of January 1909 at Glebe in New South Wales, aged 65. Their fifth child, another daughter, Johanna, was born on the 16th of February 1845 at Reedsdale. She married John O'Hare at Urelian on the 5th of February 1869. They had 9 children, and she died on the 28th of September 1880 at Majors Creek, aged only 35. Her youngest child was only 13 months old. There was a mention of John O'Hare on the 17th of June 1893 in the Freeman's Journal of Sydney. Gold mining prospects. The Braidwood Dispatch states that Mr John O'Hare and party are opening up a new reef on what is called the Sugarloaf Knob at Burlang, 3 miles from Major Creek. The reef is reported to be 4 foot wide. The sinking is only some 9 or 10 foot deep at present, the reef being in the solid granite and sinking consequently being rendered very difficult. It carries a rich vein of gold throughout it. Samples have been given on a return of 4 ounces to the 10. And on the 12th of September 1919 in the Braidwood Dispatch and Mining Journal, an obituary of James O'Hare. Another of the old identities of the district in the person of Mr John O'Hare of Burlang, Majors Creek, crossed the Jordan yesterday morning. He'd reached the ripe age of 84 years. Coming to this district when he was barely 24 years of age, he'd resided here ever since. For some time after his arrival, he was engaged in mining at Areluan. Like many others attracted there by the gold fever, he did not make a fortune. Subsequently to the Majors Creek field when it broke out, he did fairly well there. When the gold yield declined, he turned his attention to the land, purchasing a property at Burlang. This he attended as the time went on until he managed to acquire a nice little estate of 2,000 acres that he devoted principally to grazing and cultivation of wattlebark, out of which later he did remarkably well of late years. Always a hard-working man, he occupied practically all his time in improving and attending to his property. He dearly loved a horse, and in times gone by, the local race meeting would not be considered complete unless a couple of his horses competed. For some time past he'd been in feeble health, but it was not until a week or so before his death that he took to his bed. He leaves 2 sons, John and James, who've managed the estate for him for some years, Miss S. O'Hare, Mrs. M. Murphy of Mundaman, and Mrs. Castles of North Sydney. The 6th child, another daughter, was Catherine, who was born on the 6th of November 1846 at Harold's Cross at Farringdon, New South Wales. She married Patrick Whetstone in Braidwood in 1870. They had a daughter, Eliza, in 1871, and Catherine died on the 20th of June 1872 at Burketown at Areluan, aged only 25. Their first son, William Jr., was born on the 29th of May 1848 at Ballalaby in New South Wales. However, he died at the age of 12 on the 16th of February 1861 at Lower Areluan, New South Wales. And in the Braidwood Observer and Miners Advocate on the 20th of February 1861, it outlined the inquest into his death. The inquest held at Mr Gilligan's Crown Flat on Monday on the view of the body of William Greenwood, aged 12, son of Mr Greenwood, innkeeper. The inquisition was had in consequence of certain rumours which had been set on foot with respect to the medical treatment of the deceased, but the jury, having heard the evidence of the boy's parents and Dr Beer, decided that a post-mortem examination was not necessary and returned a verdict of death from natural causes, expressing an opinion that no blame was attached to Dr Beer. An 8th child, a son, James, was born on the 25th of September 1850 at Reedsdale, and he died on the 20th of July 1854 at Majors Creek, aged 3. The next child, John, was born on the 20th of September 1852 at Ballalaby, and he died on the 5th of March 1854, aged 18 months, at Farringdon, New South Wales. The 10th child and the only surviving son, James, was born on the 14th of February 1855 at Majors Creek. He married Sarah Louise Barnett at Braidwood on the 16th of February 1876. They had 9 children and lived at Majors Creek, and James died on the 30th of July 1927 in Marrickville, New South Wales. His probate listed that James Greenwood, late of Marrickville but formerly of Majors Creek near Braidwood, retired grazier. His obituary was published in the Braidwood Dispatch and Mining Journal on the 12th of August 1927. An old resident of the district in the person of Mr. James Greenwood died in Sydney last Saturday. His death was very sudden. He was playing cards till 10 o'clock when he got up from the table to go to bed. Almost immediately he fell back and was deceased when picked up. Heart disease was the cause of death. The deceased some months ago sold his farm at Majors Creek and has since resided in Sydney with his daughter. He was a good sport and in years gone by always had a horse or 2 in train. The best of his stable was Kitty B, which won a number of races in Sydney. His funeral was attended by a number of old Braidwood district residents. And the 11th child and the youngest, Bridget, was born on the 28th of December 1857 in Majors Creek. She married James Wilson Ellis, a contractor, and they had 4 daughters, and Bridget died on the 18th of May 1884 at Majors Creek, aged only 26, quite possibly in childbirth. So I hope you enjoyed the story of Margaret Greenwood. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.